We're starting on chapter 11, Glimpses of Africa. It's a big chapter, so we're going to break it down into parts. John, before we start, what inspired you to go to Africa?
Oh, nothing very much inspired me. I was in a very desperate strait before then. I'd had this great love experience with a woman, which in this world didn't come to anything, but it completely turned my life upside down, and I was really quite unable to continue as I had been. In other words, with a farm and a good wife, a lovely little home. In fact, what many people would consider an enviable way of life. It was like I was like toothpaste squeezed out of the tube. I just couldn't go on living in that state, and in sheer desperation, completely not knowing what to do, where to go. I happened to have a small motor caravan then, which I'd bought not so long ago, and I just went off in that, and for 3 years, I think, basically this was my home, and I just sort of wandered around in a sort of daze, really. Extreme depression, and really desperately unhappy, because I'd been shown this great out of this world experience of love, which of course didn't add up to daily life experience in this world. I was sort of thrown out of this world and yet had to continue living in it. And I was this was a new experience for me, and I was completely lost in between the two. And I had an old girlfriend from many, many years back who'd gone out, who'd met a South African farmer, had gone out to South Africa and had produced a number of children there, and rather lost touch with her, but I forget who wrote first. Anyway, she came back into contact and told me that her husband had died, and invited me out to help on the farm. So only too ready to grasp at any straw. I was only too grateful. I remember I was picking fruit to live there. I was picking, I'd been picking strawberries and soft fruit through the summer, then it went on to picking plums, and I was picking apples at the time, and I managed to get together enough money to pay for my airfare to Johannesburg, South Africa. So I flew out, and when eventually I met with her, it didn't really work out at all as I'd rather hoped. And so after a few days, less than a week, I think, I thought, oh, this is hopeless. And again, in desperation, I just hired a little car and set off, and God knows where. I had no plan, nothing at all, and didn't even have a good map. But just being the sort of person I am, I took the minor roads and headed into the empty spaces on the map, and wrote a book about my adventures. Not that it was meant to be a book; it was really just an extended letter back to my good wife, and who stood by me. We loved each other deeply. We just couldn't bear living together, really. Well, she could, but I couldn't. It was my problem, really. And anyway, she was the loyalest and best of my friends, and we kept in touch by correspondence. And my mother and father were alive at that time. I was just 51 then, just 51. Still pretty active. But just completely was completely screwed up with loneliness and desperation and just not knowing what to do with myself. Anyway, so this extended from a letter to my mother and father and my wife. This was kept in a folder for 35 years, and not long ago I decided it was worth printing. So that's become a book called Mystic Naturally. I'm going to change the title, actually, Mystic Yearning in Africa. And the extracts from this book are what we're going to look at now.
On the first page, John, in chapter 11, in your little introduction, you write, a world in one country. I was, however, already reaching out beyond these worldly cares.
Yes.
And then you go on, I knew that these world's problems are seldom solved by worldly means, for cast into worldliness, we ourselves, their cause.
Yes, this was becoming clear to me at this time. See, I'd already been given a clear insight of a world beyond this world. And I'd realized by then that well, in a way, it was perhaps more theoretical than fully realized. I was just getting glimpses of it really at this time. There was another world besides this one, of which this world was like a shadow, really. This world was incomplete compared to what increasingly became to me now the real world, which is complete. And in this love experience which I had had, which was a glimpse of complete and total love. In contrast, our love experiences in this world are all too often incomplete, in that they are limited by space and time. You know, however wonderful they may be in their short duration, if you're fortunate enough to find it in this world, which I never had. Well, I thought I'd found it, but it never really, as we say, worked out. It never really, well, I'll leave it at that. It never really worked out. And but I'd been shown a higher level where these limitations were not present. They weren't there. I'd received a glimpse, you see, of what I suppose I dare call perfect love. But it was only a glimpse, but enough of a glimpse to make me realize that love in this dimension is never really as complete as we wish it was, because we've fallen from here where it is perfect to here where it's imperfect, you see, to there where it's unlimited, to here where it's limited. And if you're not sure what I mean by limits, think of it as space and time, you see. Real life, real love is beyond space and beyond time. It is not limited. And perhaps as we develop this conversation, I'll be able to illustrate it in a way that's perhaps more meaningful to you.
So John, to clarify, so it was this glimpse that really kind of pulled you out of your life as you've known it.
Yes, this glimpse had.
What I'm hearing you say is that it just no longer allowed you to continue life the way you've known it.
Yes.
So was it like an inner yearning that you just had clarity that you needed to, something needed to change? Marriage, farm, leaving?
Oh, inner yearning plus, yes. And irresistible. This word yearning is hardly a strong enough word. Compulsion more. But what needs really understanding, you see, is that even now at 85, when people say all sorts of sort of slightly exaggerated things about where I am in spirit, you see, I'm very much a man still, and humanly, we still have human feelings. I mean, I'm not beyond this thing, even now, this time of my life. And at the age of 50, I most certainly wasn't. You know, my natural hormones were still functioning. I was an active man, physical man. You know, I looked at women as men do, and you know, an attractive woman has an effect upon a man. This is you know, undeniable. You can't pretend it doesn't. And so this perpetual yearning for love, which has always been very, very powerful in me. It was always sort of looking in this world for that outlet, for looking for the perfect answer, the perfect person. And I thought I'd found it, you see, in this woman. I thought, oh God, this is it. And then I lost it, you see. It never worked out. So I'd found it and I'd lost it. So that's the number one factor. But yet I'd also been shown a higher reality where I know how I can put it. What I'd lost in this world, you see, I found in spirit. Now this became ever more real. What does it mean to find in spirit? Of course, there's no physical form. This is the difficulty. When you find something in spirit, it's, you know, it's invisible. You can't see it. You can't touch it. You can't wrap your arms around it. Not in the physical world. There isn't a body there. It's a spiritual finding. And of course, when you're still living in a physical body, you can't just turn away from that and just become a spiritual being. So we're torn between the two. Part of us, the evolving spiritual person, it's in spirit. But what about this thing that's left behind? And so I referred last week to loneliness, you see, the consequence of any great love experience, you see, that isn't fulfilled is this excruciating loneliness. Where is the loneliness? Because the loneliness is at this level, at this human level. Up here, I've been meditating for years. I'm used to deep experience in meditation. In meditation, you may find this. You may find this infinite embrace, what's called in the scriptures the everlasting arms, this utter come unto me of the God of love, as Jesus says, come unto me, which is what every lover longs for, isn't it? The beloved to say, come unto me. This is what we all long for, to be held, isn't it? To be held, come unto me. Well, see, we look for it in the human realm. And if we're lucky, we may receive that invitation. But all too often we don't. Hence this unfulfilled longing for that summons to love, which we have to live with, usually unfulfilled, certainly in my case, unfulfilled, but fulfilled in this higher realm, in spirit. Well, so in between these two polarities, we go up and down, and it may take many, many, many years until this becomes more real than that. And I won't say that it's completed in me even now. I'm 85. I'm talking about, I'm 35 years older than when I wrote this book, when I first began to describe this, you see. And I was 51 when I wrote what we're talking about now. And this process had already been evolving, I think, for 35 years previous to that, because I think my first sense of having love awakened and left yearning for what didn't actually become fulfilled had been a feature of my life really since I was a teenager. So it was very familiar to me. I do hope you're following what I say. I can sense that it must sound a bit well, out of this world. Well, it is out of this world, isn't it? That's exactly what it is.
I think
Yes.
it's easy to follow how you're explaining it, John. Of course, like everything you talk about, having the actual experience obviously is beyond the talking about it.
Yes, of course it is. Of course it is. Yes, it's words can only sort of hint at what is essentially beyond words. Yes, the real experience of it.
Would you say in your experience, just to go a little bit deeper, that this glimpse of, what you call love, and you've talked about the levels of love, is even possible to find in this world?
Oh, well, that's a wonderful question. It's a funny thing. Hope never dies, really, does it? Extraordinary, really. Yes. No, I wouldn't say it's impossible. There's another lovely phrase I often refer to, said by Jesus: with God, all things are possible. Yes, I wouldn't say it's impossible, dear, at all. Otherwise, why would one hope for it? But there's some people sort of write off this world as illusion or not it, and become quite dismissive of this world. But that's sometimes of my life. I think when I was much, much younger, I might have said the same things, but I'm much older now. And no, I feel that this world is a, I said earlier, I described it as a shadow of the real world. It's a sort of, in many ways, it's like looking in a mirror, In the mirror, an image is back to front, isn't it? I think on the screen, this seems to be my left ear, isn't it? Or my right ear. But anyway, in actual fact, it's the other way around, isn't it? So there's a certain sort of that effect between what I call the real world and this world. But nevertheless, it's permeated by, it's not permeated by, I just refer to this amazing fact that's recorded in Scripture, that God so loved the world that he gave his Son, you see. If the deeper you go into the whole significance of this, for God so loved, it was because, see, God didn't dismiss the world as illusion. He saw the loneliness of man, the unhappiness of man getting it wrong, and sent a messenger, sent his Son, Jesus Christ, you see, to help get us back on track. And Jesus' message, first of all, was repent, which means basically to come home, which means really basically the world's the wrong way around, because we've left the higher world and fallen in consciousness down to this lower world. And the word repent simply means to turn the right way around again, come back home. And this is really the summons of all wisdom teaching, to come back home, to repent. to recognize that man is in an unnatural state and come back to being natural, which is back home with God. So I like to use the phrase, man, the human problem is that we are absent from home, which was absent from the presence of God. And that's why it's so important to be present. And the simplest way to be present is just to listen and look and be present. And immediately the problems of the world dissolve. And we see we stop being lost in our head. We come back to being present.
Talking about glimpses of Africa, on page 77, you write, "Nothing matters except that love must flow." And to give you a little introduction to this sentence, you wrote, "I'm totally resolved into a channel, like a huge irrigation pipe pouring love into the world. It doesn't matter if I sit alone and unnoticed in a dark corner, it doesn't matter at all." And then you write, "Nothing matters except that love must flow." And what do you really mean by love must flow?
Yes, this was already beginning to come into reality for me. Of course, it's become much more so, as years have passed. I can't stress enough what a long, slow evolution spiritual life is. At every stage, we tend to think we know and we've got it, or we've reached a satisfactory understanding of where we are in life. And then next year or the year after, or 5 years later, you look back and you realize you'd hardly started, really. But I'm totally resolved into a channel. This experience came to me. I think it had been growing in me for many, many years, almost since I was a very young man. I think when I felt it mostly in terms of love of nature, this almost worship of nature that was been such a feature of my life. This sort of total love of every grain of earth and little insect and leaf and grass. Which I found so easy to love in contrast to man, which I've always found difficult. I found no sort of limitation in nature, whereas people tended to laugh at me and think I was crazy and say, you're too emotional or something. Nature always seemed much kinder. And then meditation sort of channeled, I suppose, that love, because the great sort of principle of meditation is that you let go like that. Now you let go of all these inhibitions and limitations, the I can, I can't. It's well described like getting into a hot bath at the end of the day. You just take off your clothes, you get into the hot water. That's meditation, you see. Now in meditation, whatever's in you, and in my case, I always felt there's this ocean of love that I felt so frustrated because I felt this ocean. I couldn't find anyone to give it to. I could give it to nature, but I was always looking for the perfect woman who could actually receive this love. And that's where I could never get rid of it almost. I was always longing for an outlet for this love. And then in meditation, I began to realize I could give it to this, you see. And then I recognized that this is really prayer. This is what prayer is all about. It's surrender, you see, to this higher authority, to this greater love. My little love could merge into this infinite love. And I suppose what I wrote then, I'm totally resolved into a channel. And it didn't matter at all whether I actually had a woman or even a an object or some sort of, some sort of mission in this world to fulfill, because this was unlimited by space and time. In this instance, I was just sitting in a dark church. It was just there was only a little paraffin lamp in the middle of the church, so everybody was in dark. And I wrote this. I was sitting in a corner, surrounded by black faces, and I think the only white man there. I'm sure I was, and that's what I felt. I just felt this total outpouring of love, and I didn't need to be anywhere else. I could have been a worm inside the ground. Nobody need even know of my existence. It's love was completely independent of my worldly circumstances. And I also I already had begun to think about, people holy men who lived in caves up in the mountains somewhere, and I always rather fancied myself doing that. And of course, I know perfectly well that this infinite love can be expressed perfectly well sitting alone in a cave. You don't have to be out there in the performance of this world. And being a great lover of meditation, I've always felt that to close my eyes and sit in some, unseen, unknown, I was even more effective, really, in embracing the whole world than I ever could have been trying to do it in terms of, numbers of bodies, really, or some sort of measurable result. So totally resolved into a channel, and the only thing that mattered, really, nothing to do with me. John Butler completely fades out of the picture, but it's that this infinite love might not be impeded by anything coming from me. That's it. Yeah. But see, if only one could live there all the time. This is the problem. If I could live there all the time, then bingo, there's no more problem. But the trouble is, you come back into this, and then of course there's this awful loneliness because you've had some acquaintance with this, and here you are locked up, as it were, in prison, not so much a physical prison, but an emotional prison. That's what's so painful. Physical pain is nothing compared to the emotional pain, the heart's longing. The heart's longing that's it. It's the heart, you see, the emotional part of us. Yes, that's where the real pain is. The suffering is. Yes. I've been thinking, now as, of course, when I first introduced the love of God, whatever did that mean? As a child, what on earth does it mean? Somehow now, at the end of my life, perhaps I'm drawing a bit closer to it. And this yearning. They say the angels weep, don't they? The angels weep. Those that are close to God, that heaven grieves for our lost world, for our human condition, for this, I don't know, who can say, does God grieve? I don't know, God knows. But somehow, obviously, the higher beings are not unaware that this outpouring of the love of God is, at least in the human condition, basically unreceived, because we're turned away. How can you love someone? You can meet the most adorable person in this world, but all too often they're turned away, aren't they? They're busy or something, or, must get on or something, and occupied with something or other, and have other priorities, and you can't love can't get in. It's just as simple as that, really. It's like a closed door. So here's this love beaming down from heaven, rather like spiritual sunshine, and And so often in the human, you can love nature because nature's open to it. But see, humanity closes the door, draws the curtains of the mind, that is, the close, hardens the heart, you see. And you can't get in. This is it. This is the problem, really. Because we've turned away, we've fallen from grace, fallen from heaven into this lower consciousness, closed the door. This is it, me and mine. This is my reality. Well, the love's trying to get in. There's a famous painting, one of Holman Hunt, of, you see, Jesus is standing at the door knocking, knock, knock, let me in. But he won't open the door because it's we that have got to open the door of our hearts for infinite love to come in, you see. So loneliness isn't just a human condition. It's the loneliness of the lover as much as the beloved, you see. The lover longs to love, but he can't get in. All too often. It's much easier to love a dog than another person, isn't it? Dogs don't say no, do they? You can love your garden, love the flowers, love everything, except the person next door who all too often, oh, I must get on. I must do this or do that. Oh dear. That's it. Loneliness. Oh, it's a great subject, loneliness. I do don't dismiss it, my dears, as something, oh, you shouldn't be lonely, you should be thankful or something. No, study loneliness, and because it'll greatly deepen your understanding of the human condition and what the great work is to alleviate it. I don't know that we ever in this world, I don't know, completely, certainly there are times, and I describe further on in this chapter, the wonderful experience of opening up to infinite space in Africa. And there in this world, this wasn't a heavenly experience, this was an actual experience of I wasn't yet in the desert, that comes later, but this was the sort of preliminary experience to being in the desert, where I was in a part of South Africa called the Karoo, which is this great natural plateau in the center of the country, where I described this flat expanse of in worldly terms, nothing from horizon to horizon, just a long, straight, empty road. And I just loved this because I felt that, oh, thank God. And I felt so much at home there. I felt so much at home in nothing. And I already knew this in meditation, but this was in this world. That's why I've always loved space and the emptiness of this world, which is the opposite of emptiness. This is the fullness. This is the fullness of self-abandonment to the infinite space. And there I was beginning to understand that this infinite space is love. Love is space and space is love, because it offers no restriction, you see. Love is the total freedom. Love isn't, I've got you. This is the beginnings of love, maybe. You're mine and I'm yours. But real love is all embracing. You see, these are the everlasting, infinite arms, the love of God. And once you get a taste of that, you see, this is just not big enough. And this wonderful space in Africa, I fell in love with it. And I'd always loved space, but this was space, even bigger than I'd ever seen before. And I suppose I was more ready. I was more ready for this greater experience. One's capacity to enter into and merge into the infinite, of course, develops throughout your life. It never ends, and ultimately this is the preliminaries of what one might call union, when the individual is completely taken up into the love of God. Many, many stages, my dears. It's the great adventure, love's great adventure. And loneliness is really the spur, the pain in one's heart, that this longing that ultimately must find its must find the beloved. That's it.
Page 78. I mean, you write about what you just spoke about, but there's this one line that I stood out. Maybe one of life's last lessons is to be alone.
Yes. Be alone. Be all one. Interesting word, alone, isn't it? All one. Yes. To be alone, yes, all one. You see, in the real world, well, let's use this phrase, the love of God, whatever it means. You see, it's not divided, is it? It's one. Look at the sky, my dears. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, look at the sky. How many skies are there? Just one sky, isn't there? And when I talk of the infinite, merging in the infinite, how many infinites are there? It's one, isn't it? So it isn't, going up on a mountain and leaving behind the world of people and we're opting out of social life. It may start like that. This is, as a young man, I would all too often do this when I couldn't cope with people. But it develops. I think I wrote that because someone had said to me the day before, I think someone had said he couldn't cope with loneliness. Well, I'm not sure that I could cope with loneliness then. I was half mad with loneliness at times. But I think, yes, I know. I remember what it was because as I was living in this little car, I was sleeping out under the stars. If the weather was something or other, I'd sleep in the car, and by day I was wandering really in this infinite space all around me, and just drunk with space really, and in that space, you see, I didn't find loneliness. I found the love I longed for. This was the marvelous thing. That love and space began to come together. What I lost in this world, I found in spirit. Extraordinary. What I lost in this world, I found in spirit. The infinite. See, when you get into into this great scales of things, you can't really differentiate between love or freedom or peace, or all these things rather melt into each other. So the meaning of words really belong to a lower level. As the heart expands, as this, I won't even say the heart expands, because it's everything that has name and form and measure expands into the nameless, formless, and measureless. And this is where we find real life. Look, my span of life is coming to an end. Even yours is halfway through. Our span of life is obviously limited, isn't it? mind is limited. My capacity to think, all my human capacities are limited. My tummy is limited, all these. But this is unlimited. It may seem like it's like this almost exploding into, and you think you think this is the end of you, but actually it's the beginning. But you have to. This has to be experienced. And I found that meditation has been the most wonderful practice for gradually, very gently, in a way you can cope with, gradually sort of opening up and expanding. So at night I can talk with such confidence as I do now about this growth into ever higher levels of consciousness. That's what it is, higher levels of consciousness.
That's why you refer to it as the work.
That's why I refer to it as the work. And this is the great all oneness. And you see, the aloneness is because it isn't actually dependent on anything or anyone else. It's something that is true for every being, every soul, every heart is called this way. Many, of course, perhaps most people, they find some sort of mission or a partner in this world and find their satisfaction here. Well, so be it. This is, many are called this way and few are chosen. This is how Jesus describes it. We're not all called this way. You wouldn't be watching this video, but unless you were interested in the subject. So perhaps what I'm saying is not irrelevant to you. To most people, perhaps in the world, it's just double Dutch, it's meaningless. But if you've got even an inkling of what I'm talking about, well, you're fortunate because if you practice and work as I've done, God willing, you'll receive the same blessing. Well, it'll never be the same because each one's destiny is unique, but the love of God will become ever more real to you. And then you will begin to see why the world is as it is and what man's true work is. The consciousness of the world can be raised, because if it's raised in one, you see, it's raised in all. And this is the work of prayer, the great work of prayer. And there's nothing in this world more powerful than the work of prayer, my dear. All the bombs and guns and tractors in this world are nothing compared to the work of prayer. Once you get some understanding of prayer, because in prayer you see you link into Almighty God, Almighty and most merciful God, higher authority. God knows what to do with this world, and you and I do not. The less of me, the more of God. Thanks be to God.